Hi everybody, this is the Mate City Plus and it's Mate's more city-oriented model. Well, clues in the name there, isn't it? We're going to dive into how this bike performs in this video, or if you prefer, you can read the full review over at eBike Tips. There's a link to it in the description below. As ever, please consider subscribing if you enjoy this video, as it really helps the channel. Right, so how much do you know about Mate? They're a pretty new company and they exploded onto the scene in 2018 with a crowdfunding campaign for the Mate X, which they described as the coolest foldable e-bike ever. And you know, it certainly caught the zeitgeist. It grossed over $12 million in pre-orders. Now, we've had that bike to review and there's a link to that review below too. It's quite a fun and quirky bike with its massive tyres, although it's really heavy and the fold is basically pointless. Now, the City Plus is building out the range in a more urban focused and some would say sensible direction. City Plus keeps the same basic frame design with this central beam holding the battery internally in the frame here. It's a full suspension design. There's a basic looking damper back here and a fork at the front that you can lock out if you prefer. There's a standard fold hinge here for packing the bike down and one in the steerer here. You can see that the City Plus has a standard 20-inch wheel set with City tyres. The power comes from a rear hub motor. There's a 468 watt-hour battery in the frame, which is big for a folding bike. For £200 less, you can have the standard City spec, which is a 360 watt-hour battery. And to be honest, that's going to be a better option for nearly everyone, as it will make the bike lighter. And it's unlikely you're going to need to be riding a bike like this for long enough to get anywhere near the limit of the range on this big battery. Up here, there's a colour display and a remote on the bars. It's not exactly a full City spec. There's no lights and mud guards. Those are both optional. And the lights Mate offers are rechargeable ones rather than integrated ones that run off the main battery. You get a 7-speed Shimano transmission with a Revo Shift twist shifter up here and an Altus rear mech. There are Well-Go folding pedals to finish the bike off. The City Plus frame is only available in one size, but Mate claims that anyone from 150 centimetres up to 200 centimetres should be able to ride it. And there's a maximum rider weight of a generous 125 kilos. Now, I'm 189 centimetres, I didn't find it too cramped, and there's plenty of seat post left for taller riders than me. If you're very short, you'll probably find that the high front end makes it feel a bit upright. The saddle and grips are comfortable enough. The ride of the bike is pretty decent. The rear shock is pretty basic, but it does take the sting out of potholes without bucking the bike up in the air. At the front, budget forks are usually horrible in one way or another, but actually this one's not too bad. One of the benefits of small wheels is that a fork isn't especially long. Because of that, it's not as prone to flex. The damping in this fork is probably best described as agricultural, and it will clunk as it tops out over the speed humps and things like that. But to be honest, I've had much worse. On this bike, it probably nudges into being a net benefit, and that's very often not the case. The steering is reasonably neutral, and although there's an amount of flex from the long steerer tube, it doesn't really affect the handling too much. Hauling yourself to a stop using these Tektro mechanical brakes, simple enough. They have plenty of bite to stop the bike's 21 kilo mass, even on the steep stuff. Okay, let's talk about the motor. Well, like every other motor you'll find out there, it's nominally rated at 250 watts, but one 250 watt motor is not like another. They vary a great deal. And in all honesty, this one's not especially powerful. It's near the bottom end of the 250 watt motors that I've tried. I normally point each bike I ride at a benchmark hill, which allows me to get a feel for how they compare. The hill is 1.5 kilometres at an average of 5%, but it gets up to 12% on the steepest section. Now, the Mate is actually geared quite intelligently, so the lowest gear is good for climbing, but even then, I was having to put in some significant effort to get myself around the steep corner. Certainly, it wasn't anywhere near as powerful as the motor in the Apache Wakita that I tested recently, which is a cheaper bike. The bottom line here is, if you live somewhere hilly, this probably isn't the bike for you. That's not the only problem I have with the motor system. There are 5 levels of assistance, which as usual for a cheap motor system is too many, because the first 2 are basically no assistance at all, and you may as well not bother. Also, it does that annoying thing of limiting the assistance speed when you're in the lower modes. So if you're in level 3, for example, the motor cuts out at about 21 kilometers an hour. It's annoying because the motor is reasonably effective on the flat, so level 3 would probably be enough. But 21 kilometers an hour feels like a crawl, so you end up sticking in the top mode anyway, and that drains the battery quicker. Talking of the battery, 468 watt hours is a decent battery size, especially for a folding bike, and Mate says that the City Plus has a range of up to 80 kilometres. Now hilly Bath is tough on batteries, and I managed to get 3 laps of the commute in. That's about 27 kilometres, 500 metres of climbing, before the old range anxiety kicked in and I was reaching for the charger. On this bike, the range anxiety is exacerbated by 2 things. Firstly, the bike is noticeably better when it's fully charged. Below about half charge, the hills are much more of a struggle. Secondly, the battery readout is heavily affected by the load on the motor, so when you're chugging uphill, the charge drops on the display. Now the City Plus has a percentage display of battery remaining, but it's basically meaningless. On one ride, the battery dropped to below 40% as I was cresting a big hill and recovered to about 65% on the freewheel down the other side. So that's about a quarter of the battery that either is or isn't full, depending on what you're doing. Even if it was just a 4-bar graphic, you'd be a bit loath to trust it. The fold is pretty effective. When we reviewed the Mate X, it was hard to see the point of folding it, but the narrower wheels of the City Plus give it a smaller folded volume, and it's almost 10 kilos lighter, so much easier to manhandle onto a train or into the boot of a car. It's still 21 kilos though, so if you're slightly built or you're physically impaired, then you might still have trouble lifting it, and it's still big enough that you'll need a decent boot in your car to get it in with the seats up. It certainly is in usable folding bike territory for a lot of people though, which the Mate X definitely wasn't for anyone, basically. Overall, the Mate City Plus is okay, but where the Mate X is partly relying on its quirky mix of features and its backstory of the super successful crowdfunder, the City Plus really needs to do it solely on merit, and compared to some of the other bikes, it doesn't look like the best option out there right now. If you want a folding bike for this kind of money, then our pick at the moment is probably the MyRider 1. And there's a link to that below too. It weighs less than 18 kilos, it folds up impressively small, and it costs less than the City Plus. Okay, the battery is small, but really a folding bike isn't designed for long treks, and I wouldn't fancy more than about a half hour on any of the ones I've tried, so range is a secondary issue most of the time. The Rally Stow E-Way is also worth a look. It's heavier than the MyRider, but you get a bigger battery and a full city setup with lights and mudguards. Again, there's a link below. If you're sold on this bike, then between the Mate City and City Plus, the cheaper bike would get my vote. Save the £200 on the bigger battery and you'll save some weight too. But neither would be top of my list right now. So that's the Mate City Plus. In our opinion, not quite the bike it could be. Let us know your thoughts about it, and if you've got any questions about any of the bikes we've mentioned in this video, stick them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you with another video soon.